All right, let's take a closer look at the Gamecocks' upcoming game against the Ole Miss Rebels. And don't worry, I'm not going to dive into offense versus defense and defense versus offense. I'm not just going to read a bunch of numbers out to y'all. But there is one aspect of this game that I do think Gamecock fans will need to pay attention to. An aspect of this game that I think South Carolina Lamont Paris can take advantage of. And that is the fact that Ole Miss, in terms of their defense on the road, they've not performed all that well to this point in the season. In 6 total road games this winter, the Ole Miss Rebels are giving up an average of 78.8 points per game to their opponents. They are being outscored on average by 7 points when they are on the road. Now, to dive into this a little bit further, 4 of those 6 road games have been against teams who rank in the top 50 nationally in field goal percentage defense. That includes opponents like UCF, LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee. South Carolina will be the 5th team this season on the road that Ole Miss has faced that fits that same group. Ole Miss, in the 4 games that they've played against those kind of teams to this point in the season, are 1-3. And they allow their opponents to shoot 47.6% from the field. That's 7.5 percentage points higher than what the Rebels do offensively in those same games. To top it all off, the Ole Miss Rebels do not have a lot of experience facing a team like South Carolina, who's going to slow things down to a snail's pace because of their defensive prowess and also how they play in the half court offensively. They've only faced one team on the road this season that ranks in the bottom 120 in the country in adjusted tempo, and that is Texas A&M, who according to KenPom ranks 318th in terms of adjusted tempo out of 362 Division I men's basketball teams. South Carolina, for reference, is 353rd. They are the 9th slowest team, if my math is correct, in the country when it comes to their tempo. And the thing that I did note about that last bullet point there is Ole Miss did defeat the Texas A&M Aggies. I believe the final score of that game was actually 71-68. So Ole Miss was held to a lower point total than they're used to when they're playing at home for comparison's sake. But A&M just was not able to hit a bunch of shots on that night, and that was a bit of an outlier performance for the Rebels in terms of efficiency and volume when it came to their three-point shooting, because they made 41.7% of their three-point shots, or 10 of their 24 attempts. Against the other teams that I talked about earlier, Auburn, LSU, and Tennessee in the SEC, Ole Miss shot 23.5% against Auburn, they shot 25% against LSU, and they shot 37.5% against Tennessee when it came to three-point shooting. So, when they're on the road and they're facing a notable defense in this conference, Ole Miss struggles when it comes to their three-point shooting. And the thing is, that is something that this team has leaned on a lot this year. As a matter of fact, I think the Rebels are 13th in the country when it comes to three-point shooting percentage, offensively speaking. So in this game, South Carolina, obviously, they're going to have to account for that. Ole Miss has a balanced scoring attack in their starting lineup. They have at least 4 players that average 12 points per game or more. That is led by Matthew Morrell, who Gamecock fans might be familiar with because South Carolina played against Matthew Morrell when they played Ole Miss this past season, I believe on 3 different occasions. But if South Carolina can limit Ole Miss's three-point attempts, in essence, if they can force them to have to make contested shots, force them to play some isolation basketball, which Ole Miss might not be comfortable doing because Ole Miss ranks dead last in the SEC when it comes to free throw attempts per game. South Carolina is the best team in the SEC in terms of not fouling their opponent. So, the Rebels are going to probably be forced to have to make a lot of shots far away from the basket. That plays in the favor of South Carolina, if you ask me. And then offensively speaking, South Carolina, they have faced teams before that are not very good defensive teams. Kentucky's a good example. I believe that they ranked in the 90s in terms of defensive efficiency, according to KenPom, when the Gamecocks played the Wildcats a couple weeks back. And we all saw what happened in that game. Kentucky, they just could not stop South Carolina defensively. I kind of view Ole Miss as a team of a similar ilk, the only difference being that Ole Miss is willing to kind of play at a slower pace. That is something also to watch in this matchup. But when you look at this entire game and you look at how these teams match up against one another, in my opinion, in this league, in this sport, just like football, defense has to travel for you if you want to win games like this. And so for Ole Miss, we have to just look at the numbers. At this point, it is a trend. When they play on the road against capable opponents in this conference, Ole Miss does not fare well defensively speaking. So I expect South Carolina to have a really good night tonight offensively. They've also been on an absolute torrid pace lately when it comes to assisting on their baskets. I believe that each of their last 48 makes, they've assisted on 40 of those baskets. And I believe John Rothstein tweeted out that statistic or put that in an article that he posted a couple days back. So South Carolina's offense right now, they are humming in terms of sharing the basketball. That does not bode well for Ole Miss in this environment in the Colonial Life Arena in front of a crowd that is going to be sponsoring a whiteout for this game. So I really like South Carolina's chances to knock off the Rebels tonight and move on to 20-3 on the season.